do you want the car that's run on all these complex parts and runs on like explosive cancer causing dinosaur juice, or do you want the thing that you plug in at night? Hello and welcome back to the Plugged In Podcast, a weekly news show all about the future of transportation. I'm Patrick George, editor-in-chief of InsideEVs.
And I'm Tim Levin, senior editor at InsideEVs. On this week's show, the world is electrifying faster than you think, especially when you look outside of the U.S., and Biden's $5 billion EV charging project is back on track after a 6-month funding freeze. But before that, we're going to spend some time digging into Ford's big EV news this week with the help of InsideEVs staff writer Suvrat Kothari, who attended the automaker's big event this week in Kentucky. Suvrat, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Tim. You mean welcome back, right? Because I've been on the show before.
Welcome back. You've been here as a co-host, now you're here as a guest.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Suvrat's one of our most prolific writers and also podcast pinch hitters. And just for any listeners out there, I want to take a moment to salute his hard work. This week, we have shuttled him all over these great United States. He was in Kentucky for Ford. He's currently in Colorado driving the Subaru Solterra, the new one. Of course, they're doing it in Colorado because it's Subaru. But I know you're probably white, but you've been kicking ass, Suvrat, and we really appreciate you being here today to chat with us. So thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for Patrick. And yeah, you're right. I'm all over the Midwest this week, but I'm having fun.
Yeah, glad, man. Before we get to this week's episode, I wanted to tease a very exciting episode we have coming up next week. Earlier this week, Tim and I sat down at a barbershop in Queens, of all places, for a lengthy conversation with Rivian CEO RJ Scaringe. That episode airs next Friday, August 22nd, and we're really excited about it because we had a really awesome and fascinating conversation with RJ. So you should definitely listen to that if you weren't going to already, because we cover a lot of topics, including Rivian's partnership with Volkswagen, where things are going with the R2 and R3, how they're keeping up with China, and a lot more stuff. So be sure and tune in.
Yeah, this was a really long and really interesting conversation, so please listen to that and let us know who else you want to see interviewed on the show. And with that, let's get into Ford's big news this week. Ford this week laid out a bold plan for next-generation EVs that can do battle with Tesla and the Chinese. Those vehicles will use a brand new vehicle platform designed from scratch and a radically different manufacturing process. Ford says all of that should help it cut costs and deliver quote-unquote breakthrough EVs that are both profitable and affordable. But before we have Suvrat tell us what's going on there, I wanted to take a step back. So tell us, what's been the deal with Ford's EV strategy up until this point? Set the stage for us.
If I had to put it in very short words, not breakthrough and not profitable so far, but
Right.
It was sort of early on the market with the Lightning and the Mach-E and the e-Transit van. At the beginning of this decade, and those models are now really starting to show their age. And then it canceled some plans, delayed its operations. It's been sort of trying to re-strategize, and now it has finally decided that it has to do something bold, something different, and sort of have that startup mentality to make its EV plans successful.
Yeah, the Mach-E, the Mustang Mach-E, people probably know this Model Y looking crossover has actually been pretty successful. The Ford F-150 Lightning came out after that. That one less so. They have not sold nearly as many of those as they wanted to. It was not the that moment where you make your best-selling truck an EV and then you're off to the races.
Yeah.
That didn't really happen.
Yeah.
So those models have not been profitable yet. And Ford's Model E division, which is what it calls its EV division, has lost $12 billion in the last 2.5 years, including $2.2 billion in the first half of this year. And sales of those electric models have also stalled out, falling 12% in the first half of this year. So like you said, it's clear that Ford needs to do something different.
Right, and its crosstown rival seems to be doing a little bit better. General Motors has standardized the Ultium platform. I know it's not called that anymore, but there are tons of new models from GM across Cadillac, Chevy, GMC brands. Ford was the number 2 EV brand for a couple of years, but GM did take that spot last year, and now its market share is expanding thanks to the Equinox EV, which is sort of a massive hit. And Ford's market share in the EV business is sort of shrinking.
Yeah, and I do want to step back and give some credit where it's due here, right? Because like you guys said, like these are really good cars that they came out with at the earlier part of this decade. Like I was back in Texas visiting family a few months ago, and I rented a Mach-E GT when I was there, and I was like, I had forgotten how much I liked that thing. And like the Lightning is an excellent truck. It just ended up being really expensive, like not able to do like everything a gas or hybrid F-150 could do. So like they came out of the gate really strong and then ran out of gas, or I guess range in our case, like pretty quickly. And like as you guys said, all the competitors are coming out with new models all the time, expanding into new segments. And like Ford ended up canceling a 3-row SUV, electric SUV, obviously, which would have been like a Kia EV9 or Hyundai Ioniq 9 competitor, because like we can't make the economics of this work. So like they had the early product juice, but they just kind of dropped it, and they're not making money. So now we got to talk about like the 2.0 approach at Ford.
You're right. So the 2.0 approach involves like focusing immensely on efficiency and how to scale this to profitable levels. So they're starting this with a universal EV platform and a universal EV manufacturing system. So we'll talk about that. So it starts with 20% fewer parts on the new platform. Ford has cut about 4,000 feet and 20 pounds of wiring compared to the Mustang Mach-E. So I think the number in miles would be around I don't know, less than a mile, or maybe a mile. And the platform is basically highly modular. So it's similar to what GM has. In a graphic that Ford shared, the platform showcased accommodating a small crossover, a 3-row SUV, a pickup truck, and an electric van. All those 4 things were very distinctly visible in that graphic. Now we know that, like you said, Patrick, the 3-row SUV has been cancelled. But during the media roundtable with Ford engineers, which happened after the announcement in Louisville, there were a lot of questions about, hey, you showed this 3-row electric SUV graphic, but you've cancelled those plans last year. So what's happening? What are you indicating with this new graphic? Are those plans back on track? And Doug Field, who's Ford's chief EV digital and design officer, he said a couple of things. First, he said that the platform, and I'm quoting him, can support a 3-row SUV, but he stopped short of sharing any concrete details. And the other thing he said was, this is a BEV only platform, quote unquote, to start with. So there could be, I don't know. Yeah. So you can make what you will from what he said. There could be some changes to the platform in the future.
Which implies, and like emphasis on implies here, like there would be potential for a gas engine to be added as a range extender purely. And like I said, implies, like we don't know that. They won't say, like that's us guessing, but like that's where my mind goes, right?
Absolutely. There could be a range extender, but we don't know for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add, so this is called the Ford Universal EV Platform, and we talked last week, kind of setting the stage for this event, about how Ford had this Skunkworks, they call it the Skunkworks project in California, that's like this group of engineers far away from the Ford mothership that were, dedicated to building this like forward-thinking EV platform, and that's what they're showing off here. This is that platform developed by this small team in Southern California, led by a former Tesla executive and staffed with a bunch of former Tesla people and other people with deep EV knowledge, right?
You're right. So the head of this program, his name is Alan Clark. He was at Tesla for 12 years. He sort of helped the Model S development program take off, and then all the future models that Tesla launched, the Model 3, the Model Y, even the Cybertruck. He was very deeply involved with all those projects. So yes, there's a bunch of Tesla talent trying to sort of help Ford take off its EV plans.
So in a second here, we'll discuss the big news, like the big draw, which is the price tag on this truck, because that was what generated the most headlines, like with InsideEVs and kind of everywhere. But before we get to that, I think it's really important to talk about how this EV is built, because no offense to like Slate, which is really clever and exciting, and I'm really thrilled to see where that goes. Like this does not seem like just some like a Lightning with cloth seats and like roll down windows. Like they are really totally rethinking how a car is built. Like this uses big aluminum castings that replace dozens of individual components that used to be welded together. It has way fewer screws involved, way fewer parts overall. The battery pack serves as a structural part of the car. Those are things that Tesla pioneered. This is when we see cars built from the ground up as EVs. They're built this way. We're going to be talking about like the software architecture and how it's built from scratch to have software updates. This is all stuff that they weren't able to achieve with Mach-E and Lightning, which, as good as they are, those are adapted from gas car platforms. Like a Lightning is an F-150 stuff with batteries, and the Mach-E started life as kind of like the Escape platform that was modified to take on batteries. But this is clean sheet, and they did it out in California, as Suvrat said, to be kind of away from like decades of legacy Detroit thinking. So it's pretty novel for a old school car company to do stuff like this.
You're right, Patrick. I think Ford went really bold with this. They went with this clean sheet approach, and they did basically what Tesla and Rivian did. So in Southern California, like Tim said, Ford is trying to be vertically integrated. So it put all its talent in one single building, physically, literally. So all the designers, engineers are working out of this one office in California. And the reason they are in that one building is so that they can collaborate more closely and sort of figure out the problems together. And that's what really helps you accelerate your EV plans.
Yeah, so tell us, like, I think one of the things, so it's the car itself is like mechanically built very differently. And then the other really big part of this is, as Patrick said, the being built from the ground up with a different electrical architecture, being able to be more updatable via software, things that historically you couldn't really achieve with these older platforms, things that companies like Tesla and Rivian can do because they started from the ground up. So tell us a little bit about this new electrical architecture, and like, what does that mean for how this car functions for people?
We're going to talk about zonal architectures, aren't we, fam? Yeah, zonal architectures.
That's what it is. Zonal architectures. That's the new buzzword in the software-defined vehicle era.
Injected into my veins. Let's go.
So similar to Tesla and Rivian, the universal EV platform will have a zonal architecture. What that means is fewer but more powerful computers who handle different functions in the car. And they will be highly upgradable through over-the-air updates. So who knows, Ford will just send 50 more horsepower to the electric truck, or sort of change the UI of the screen to make it cooler, add more features, changes to the navigation, that type of stuff that we've seen Tesla and Rivian do all these years.
And this is something that we get into, actually. This is a good teaser for next week with RJ from Rivian. He explains this really well. But the problem here, and the reason that these electrical architectures are important, and the reason that Volkswagen is paying Rivian $5.8 billion for access to its zonal architecture across its entire lineup, is that historically, broadly speaking, cars have like 100 to 200 tiny little computers throughout the car. They all do different discrete tasks, like your locks or your seat controls or your infotainment. And it means that none of them really talk to each other. It's impossible to really update them all in a synchronized way. And so this way, with this kind of new architecture, you have a smaller amount of computers, all internet connected, all doing a lot of different things. And it means that you can unlock a bunch of different, you can more easily add features over time or fix things. And so that's kind of the background there.
Everything's computer. Everything's computer. Yeah.
Everything's computer.
Everything is computer.
Right.
So we should get to what the actual first model off of this platform is going to be, because like that's the platform. It's going to underpin a whole bunch of different stuff. We know that the first model is going to be a pickup truck. Tell us what you learned about that from Ford.
Right. So it's going to be a mid-size electric truck with more interior space than the brand new Toyota RAV4, which was recently unveiled. It'll go on sale later this year. And it will have a frunk and a bed behind the cabin. So I'm sort of expecting the exterior footprint of a Maverick, but the interior space of a Ranger, but like really well packaged, because no transmission tunnel, no drive shaft, none of the silly gas car components. So Alan Clark, who's Ford's executive director of advanced EV development, he said that the electric truck will have quote unquote unprecedented aerodynamics. So designers and aerodynamicists at Ford, they worked really closely to build what he said will be one of the most aerodynamic trucks the auto industry has ever seen. Now, of course, he didn't share any details, so we don't know the drag coefficient, so none of the numbers. The most important part is the price. So it will start at $30,000 if Ford promises what it did, and it will enjoy all that space on its own because we don't have a $30,000 electric truck in the US right now. All the trucks in the US right now are big, expensive, have massive batteries. Patrick drove a Sierra EV recently, so he knows how that works.
Yeah. It's it's an interesting discussion because I think that the auto industry, like writ large, has not really figured out how to make a truly great electric pickup truck. It's like there's like two kind of big white spaces. Like one's like small light sports cars, and then the other one is trucks. And one of those is a little bit more important to these car companies' bottom lines. But it's kind of hard with that aerodynamic package and like battery range being what it is to do all the towing and hauling and everything else that truck owners expect. Like it's kind of just a little incompatible with EVs. So like I'm really excited to see how Ford found workarounds here or got it to a point where like this will do the job that we're assigning it to do, as opposed to expecting your truck to do like literally everything, which is that's going to be a change in thinking for auto customers, I think, a little bit too.
Yeah, you know what's interesting, as I was looking at what is this going to compete with, right? The Ford Maverick, which is their gas and hybrid truck, costs like $28,000. So it's actually only a little bit less than this EV. And the Ford Ranger, the gas midsize truck, is like $33,000. So you're talking about something that's like really, really competitive with gas vehicles, which is just something that like pretty much across styles of different cars, like always EVs are $10,000 to $15,000 more. And in the case of trucks, this would be a really big deal. And it would also come in at around the same, in the kind of same ballpark as the Slate, which is,
we got to talk about that.
The EV startup. Like we'll take a little detour to like talk about what this means for Slate, I think. The Slate truck backed by Jeff Bezos coming next year. That is this like compact electric pickup truck, super stripped down. And even Jim Farley, the CEO of Ford, even like kind of took direct aim, it seems, at the Slate truck in the kind of press releases for this. He said, this isn't a stripped down old school vehicle. So he's basically saying like, we're going to give you this $30,000 EV truck, but like, it's not going to be like the Slate. It's going to have an infotainment system and it'll have, maybe power mirrors and stuff like that the Slate truck doesn't have. So I personally think this is a big hit to Slate's kind of ambitions. What do you guys think about what does this mean for Slate?
I do think you're right. Ford is sort of targeting Slate's ambitions here. That does raise a lot of questions about how Slate will approach or sort of change its business model now. And I know, Tim, you've seen the Slate truck in person, so maybe you can elaborate on this. I know you already did, but Slate's truck is going to be sort of mid $20,000, and that won't even get your regular power windows or your central screen as standards. Those have to be like additional options. You have to pay more for that. I think Ford's truck will get those basic features. It will get power windows. I think it will get a central infotainment screen because this is a through and through software-defined EV platform. So it would really be a shame if it didn't have an infotainment screen to start with.
And I think the most important thing, and I'm going to let Patrick jump in, I think the most important thing is the Slate is a two-door truck. And it's going to be, we don't know the exact price yet, mid-20,000s. But a lot more people want a 4-door, 5-seat truck like this Ford is going to be than want a 2-door, 2-seat truck, which is what the Slate is going to be. So it's going to be really interesting to see how these compete against each other next year or in the next couple of years.
Might end up being different use cases or customers. Like in my mind, honestly, like I get the logical argument against Slate here, but in my mind, it's like too early to call. And like, I think if Ford had showed us any real visuals or mock-ups or rendering or even to give us a name for the damn thing, like that might be changing my mind a bit. But I'm like, let's see what they come up with and go from there. But that you might be able to choose between these two vehicles in the next few years at that price tag. That's pretty cool. I mean, that nothing like that exists in America today. So that's pretty rad, I think.
I think we should add, we haven't said it yet, I don't think, the mid-size $30,000 Ford truck coming in 2027. I don't think we mentioned a year. Yeah.
They say 27, but as every car company we cover has a weird way of seeing these things get delayed a little bit. So we'll see.
Absolutely.
All right, let's talk batteries here, Suvrat, because as I understand it, those are very important to how an electric car works. So what are we looking at? Where are they from? What size? Like, tell me what Ford told us about those.
Right. Yeah. Let's talk about the engines of electric cars. So the Ford electric truck will use a lithium iron phosphate battery and LFP battery, which are extremely popular in China. Ford claims this will be the first American EV to use US-made LFP cells. So it will be a small battery made at Ford's Blue Oval Battery Park, Michigan, and it will license the technology from CATL, which is China's and the world's largest battery manufacturer. In terms of size, Ford said it will be 15% smaller than the battery on the BYD Atto electric crossover. So some back of napkin math suggests it might be in the 50 kilowatt hour range. So not a big battery, but I think it could be pretty efficient.
And that's really small. That's like a Tesla Model Y battery, for context, is around 75 kilowatt hours.
You're right. That's a small battery. But I think Ford is focusing really on efficiency and not on battery size. The battery part is interesting because Ford and South Korean battery company SK, they have a joint venture plant just 50 miles away from the Louisville assembly plant. That Ford SK battery plant is located in Glendale, Kentucky. And that is supposed to make high nickel cells, which are sort of more energy dense. You can get more range out of it. But the electric truck will use batteries made in Michigan. But I do know that the platform will support both NMC and LFP batteries. So who knows, the Ford SK plant might supply NMC batteries for future EVs. And I do know that Ford has also opened it to Nissan because it saw uneven demand for EVs and it sort of like tried to maximize the output that this plant would have. Wall Street Journal reported that earlier this year.
Well, it's nice that Ford's helping them out because God knows they need it.
Yeah.
Correct.
So we've got this new platform. We'll use both the cheaper and like less energy dense LFP cells, also the higher density, more expensive NMC cells. And we know they've said that they're targeting these vehicles to be super efficient and basically use less of that battery than some rivals. So like one number they were throwing out there, in addition to that 15% smaller than the battery in a BYD, they also said they're targeting EVs with ranges that are comparable to rivals, but with batteries that are 2/3 the size. So that gives you a sense of like the kind of efficiency gains they're looking at here. And that's super important for like bringing down the cost. That alone, having a third less battery, can do a lot for bringing down the input cost and the price of these kinds of cars. But I think one of the things that we have not gotten to yet, and one of the things that's really interesting, is the manufacturing process, right?
Yeah.
So I think now, after witnessing this event, I think we get a better sense of why they were calling this their next Model T moment, right? That's Ford's words. And that's because the Model T was like a revolutionary car, but it was also a revolutionary manufacturing process, right? And they're saying that this universal EV platform will use something called, instead of an assembly line, an assembly tree. So tell us, like, what makes that different or better than the assembly line that Ford pioneered?
Yeah, so you're right. This is a different manufacturing process. So traditionally, cars have been manufactured on a single assembly line where parts are brought to the car and the vehicle continues sort of to move along the same path until it's finished.
Mm-hmm.
So Ford's
It kind
so-called
of like snakes, it kind of like snakes around this plant, adding parts until you get to a complete car. You start with like a body, and then, all these different parts go onto the body as it moves down this moving assembly line.
You're right. It just moves along the assembly line and workers sort of bolt on parts and work on the car. Then the new line will break up the vehicle into three different sub-assembly lines, and those will work in parallel, shrinking the overall time from start to finish and require fewer workstations. So the assembly tree will start with three separate lines. Each will make the front, the rear, and the central sub-assemblies, and the tree will then merge towards the end where all three parts come together.
I just want to throw out real quick that, like, what we're talking about here, this has not been done. For more than a century, like, there's been more automation on the assembly line, and, like, in China, and, like, I know Toyota and Tesla are experimenting with this, too. Like, there's things like cars become increasingly automated, and they sort of drive themselves through the assembly line, but the basic formula hasn't changed much. It's gotten more high-tech over 100 years. This is the company that, like, pioneered the assembly line. Henry Ford didn't invent it, but he made it work in, like, the biggest way ever. And they're changing something. And, like, that's like heretical almost. Like, it's freaking wild what is happening here. Like, this is something that hasn't really been done. So it's kind of the thing that I think is the most important news of all here.
Yeah, you're right. You're right, Patrick. So one of the main questions going into this event was, hey, like, what are you doing different from Chinese automakers? What are you doing different from Tesla? Like, what is your main differentiator? Because great EVs are already out there. Maybe not in the US. I mean, yes, in the US, some of them. But in China, you've seen they're on a whole different level. So how are you going to come back at China? And a lot of Ford engineers we spoke to were like, we're going to differentiate on the level of innovation on the manufacturing line and sort of completely redo this whole process. So I'd like to highlight that more. So the key thing to note here is working on smaller sections of the car, Ford claims, will make the assembly less physically strenuous for workers. So on the current line, workers are required to reach deep inside the car to install the dashboard. It requires a fair amount of acrobatics and flexibility, even though I know robots have made things simple. So the new line will require less twisting and bending. It will require less contorting in awkward angles because all the modules, like the front, rear, and the center module, they will come to the workers fully opened up. And one interesting thing Ford said was getting rid of something called a pop clamp. So it's a small tool, but it makes a big difference. It's basically a tool used to secure a hose over a fitting. So it can sort of fit your fuel line or a radiator hose to keep the coolant from leaking. And the clamp apparently doesn't function most of the times how it's supposed to function. It just fails. And that results in a lot of wastage. So Ford said when it showed the electric truck to its employees for the first time and how it was going to make this truck, the employees were thrilled that they were not going to use pop clamps anymore because it was causing a lot of pain. It was causing a lot of pain for the operators on the assembly line.
Yeah, and
That's
I think,
amazing.
like, they love highlighting, obviously, you can see why they would highlight, like, oh, our workers love this new process. I think, like, fundamentally, what does that mean for this platform and for the business? It's that you're building more efficiently and faster, right? They're also saying that they'll be able to, because of these new processes that are, like, easier for workers to do, they'll be able to build the cars faster, right?
You're right, but I think that's a consequence of focusing on efficiency and profitability and not necessarily not necessarily trying to make the workers' lives easy. I think it's all a consequence of trying to make cars more efficiently.
I don't want to be too, like, rah Ford on this because, like, that's not my job, but, like, I do think it was interesting, like, the degree to which, like, Farley and Doug Fields stressed how, like proud they were of using American labor and American factory and American made batteries for this. At one point in his speech, like Jim Farley is like, we could have done what everybody else did and packed it up and taken this to places with lower cost labor, like South Korea, like Japan, even like China. But we did it here in Louisville with a UAW workforce. So that's, that's unionized wages, with that is higher wages. Competing with China, where, and I looked this up, the average BYD line worker makes monthly half the average monthly income of most people in China. So like, they do edit. There have been accusations of like slave labor or quasi-slave labor throughout the Chinese supply chains. Like, so you're using like, modern American labor, which is meant to be like a good middle class union job, to like take on, a labor market that would be illegal here at the same price point. Like that's kind of crazy. Like they're attempting that. Like I will give them credit for like shooting that shot,
Yeah. So I'm going to quickly jump in here and say that part of the $2 billion investment, which has gone into the Louisville assembly plant, is going to be for upskilling and training the workers to make EVs. So right now, the Louisville plant just makes gas cars. And Ford employees, as well as UAW members who were at the event, they did say that this will result in workers getting more time. It will result in workers sort of when they go back home, they won't be sore, so it will be less physically strenuous also for them.
Super cool. So let's talk about the reactions to this, because like they've been kind of across the board, which I found interesting. Like I just from a technological point of view, and as someone, at our publication, we talk a lot about like the technological race with China. Like I find this stuff really interesting. I also have read a lot of folks who were down on this plan and being like, okay, great. Well, what do you know, Ford? Like your first crop of EVs have lit billions of dollars on fire, which they kind of have, or just saying like, great, more promises by a legacy automaker that we'll get walked back when things get too hard or the regulations change or whatever, which is kind of deserved because like everybody's kind of just like backing off now that like Joe Biden's not there to hold a gun to their head to go electric. So like I think there's a lot of like feeling burned about these promises or skepticism that Ford can even pull this off. I mean, what do you guys think? What have you heard? And then Suvrat, I'd ask also, you were on the ground. Like, what was your reaction from various parties out there, whether it was policy folks, politicians, locals, Ford people, or even journalists?
So the reaction was largely positive, but that was by design because Ford hyped the event up a lot. In the long run, I think this could work if Ford does execute on its promises because a decade is not a long time when it comes to car manufacturing because the Model T was not the first car. But what Ford did with the Model T assembly process was truly game-changing. And that's what they're promising again. Of course, there's reason to be cynical. There's reason to have skepticism. But I think Ford can pull this off because they do have the war chest for it. And they do have a lot of expertise from upstarts like Tesla. I mean, a lot of these folks are ex-Tesla employees.
Mm-hmm.
So, I don't know. What do you think, Tim?
I think it's a lot of big, bold promises. I do think if they can execute it like this, I think they're thinking about all the right things, right? They're thinking about how do we build these cars more simply? How do we package them more efficiently? How do we build them to be more deeply software enabled? Like this is all stuff that the very best EVs that we drive and know already do or are trying to do. And so I think it's really cool to see a legacy car company that is, these companies, as we talk about a lot, they have this problem where like they make their money from gas trucks. They know they need to make this switch. How do you do it? How hard do you go on EVs when really all your money is being made on the other side? And like Ford is showing here, I think that they're committed to not just like retrofitting gas cars to be EVs, but to like really trying to lead the future of this and really trying to take it to China and take it to Tesla. And like, will they execute on that? I don't think anybody knows. Even Ford, even Jim Farley himself was like, this is not guaranteed that this will all work. But yeah, I think they're thinking about this in a really smart and like ambitious way.
because what's the alternative, right? I mean, it's the day that BYD or Xiaomi or whoever like show up on our shores. Like, I think they know at Ford, like that's the day they become a maker of farm equipment, basically gas pickup trucks and not much else. Like, my joke's always like, it's like you're the next John Deere, and like that, it kind of resonates. And like this is a chance to hit back, and it's I don't know. I'm excited to see where it goes. Beats the hell out of doing nothing. Anything you want to add that we might have missed, Suvrat, before we go send you to shred across Colorado in a Subaru as one does in that state?
As one does in Colorado. Yeah, I'll add one final thing. So the main difference between Ford 1.0, which was Mach-E and Lightning and e-Transit, and what Ford is promising next is sort of like Tim mentioned, Ford is trying to address the most pressing concerns. Affordability, how you make manufacturing more efficient, batteries. So I think the approach is correct, but who knows? Even Jim Farley is sort of, he knows it's a bet. It's a risk. It may or may not pay off. But yeah, that's all I had to add.
Amazing. Suvrat Kothari, thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you so much for having me, guys.
Okay, the Ford news this week is pretty huge for the survival of that car company and for getting more EVs into the driveways of American homes, because so far we kind of suck at this. A look at the EV adoption rates for basically every other country on Earth shows that we are getting smoked here. Dusted, dog-walked, having the brakes beaten off of us. Useless as two buggies in a one-horse town.
Got any more?
No, that was it. That was all ChatGPT could come up with before I had to upgrade my subscription, which I'm not doing. So continuing on, Bloomberg's David Fickling had a column on Monday about just how far America has fallen in the EV race, where unfortunately we've never been all that great of a player anyway. We know about Europe moving to electric and hybrid cars more quickly than we are, and like I don't have to tell listeners to this show of how advanced China is, obviously. But here's a list of countries where EV sales have an even greater share of the market than ours do right now. Turkey, Vietnam, Malaysia, Indonesia is about the same as us. And for countries that rely heavily on imports, like don't have their own homegrown car industry, they're not importing gas cars. More than 3/4 of the value of vehicles brought into Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Djibouti last year were purely electric. And import shares in Ethiopia and Laos were 40% and 30% electric. So we're getting trashed by Ethiopia and Laos. Tim, what do you think of that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. This was a great story, and we often think about the EV transition as this first world thing, electric cars for rich people, right? That are getting more popular in places like the U.S. and China and Europe. And then when you really look at the numbers, you have all these so-called developing countries that are doing it better and moving faster than we are.
Yeah, and for the record, like I don't love the term developing country or third world country, but I suppose if this is the context the study came out in, like just go with me on that. But this is fascinating because it resets your idea of what's possible just a little bit. And it also speaks to what China was able to accomplish. Like some of the countries I just talked about do not have as robust a gas car infrastructure or gasoline infrastructure as the United States or parts of Europe. So they're kind of in a position to like skip a step and go straight to electric power. And when you add in the fact that like EVs need far less maintenance than gas cars do, these have become a lot more appealing in countries where like people are in different economic situations than wealthier nations.
Mm-hmm. And tell me if I'm wrong here, but I think a big part of it is that when you're talking about countries where car ownership in general is a new and developing thing, it's easier for now people's first car ever might be an EV versus in America, we have this really deeply entrenched culture of owning cars. And so it's much harder for EVs to penetrate. But like in China, for example, big part of like why they were able to move to EVs so quickly is just like there were a lot of people who were like getting cars for the first time ever in China. So, yeah.
Exactly so. And it's like, I think about this sometimes. I'm like, how many people in America can honestly say they've only ever owned electric cars?
Mm-hmm.
Like, Right now, not many. Maybe some younger people, maybe like there's some teenagers or college kids who like inherited dad's Tesla they went to college in or something.
Mm-hmm.
But like, that's a rare thing. And again, hyping next week's episode, our pal RJ Scarin kind of says something to this effect. It's like if you were to just like invent the car from scratch as if it never existed in 2025 and 2025 technology, do you want the car that's run all these complex parts and runs on like explosive cancer causing dinosaur juice, or do you want the thing that you plug in at night?
Yeah, exactly.
Like, it's not hard to figure out,
Yeah, and to be clear, what the words that I was looking for was the car ownership rates, right, are going up dramatically in these countries, as opposed to in America where like we've owned cars, households have owned cars, 2 cars each for a long time. And so let me guess, when we're talking about Ethiopia and Laos and these other countries, a lot of these EVs, I would guess, are coming from China.
That's why you're the best of the business, Tim Levin. They're not importing electric Volkswagens and Fords. I can tell you that. Any thoughts on that situation?
No, I mean, it's, we've seen various research on this recently, and obviously, like, it's a shame that, I mean, it's great that a lot of the world is developing and moving toward this faster than us. It's a shame that we are kind of giving up what could have been leadership in EVs, right? Like, when you forecast out with or without all these Biden era policies, EV sales are just going to grow a lot slower through the rest of this decade. And I think we talked about this on a previous show. It means that, like the US in terms of EV adoption rates is going to be lumped in with like rest of world as opposed to being one of the leaders along with Europe and China.
Yeah. And I do think it shows a lot of bias on the part of the media. I'd say including us too, because we always think of this as a US centric thing, a Western Europe centric thing, maybe China, Japan, South Korea, right? But it's like all the stories you read, EV adoption rates, like who's getting, up and down in Germany or whatever. And BYD is like, y'all, we just like smoked you in all of South America, like, and in huge chunks of like the African continent, like just this kind of revolution that's happening. And it's not that we don't see it. It's kind of that we choose not to see it or assign importance to it. But it is, I think that the Chinese OEMs have really made tremendous inroads in ways that like we just haven't really reckoned with. But here's the thing, like I believe, as a lot of people do, like EVs are just better cars, and they're muddled by politics here in America when they don't have to be. But if you take this to its logical conclusion, the rest of the world is adopting a better technology at a faster rate than we are, like you said. And that didn't used to happen. I can't think of many examples through history when it did happen. I like Laserdisc maybe comes to mind, but like you don't hinge like a bunch of your GDP on like Laserdiscs. So you do for the cars. But it does feel like we're kind of getting displaced more and more lately with things like hyperfast internet or even robotics and clean technology now and battery technology now. So I don't know where that goes. I don't know when people demand something better, but it does feel like we're losing out and we don't have to,
But there is also some rare good news for EVs in America. After an attack from the Trump administration, federal EV charger funding is back in business, it seems. And that means billions of dollars can start flowing again to keep doing the important work of building out more EV chargers in this country because, Lord knows we need more of those.
Heck yes. And we've had a lot of good news on the charging front in America this year. We've seen EV charging networks growing very quickly this year, regardless of that pause in funding. But it's good to see the Nevi program getting back on track if you're an advocate for EVs. So bring us up to speed here, Tim. Like, what's the latest on Nevi?
Yeah, so Nevi, for some background, is the National Electric Vehicle Infrastructure Program. It was created by Congress under the Biden administration to provide $5 billion to build out fast charging stations along major highways.
Yeah, basically to fill in the gaps in America's EV charging infrastructure, Biden had this goal of 500,000 public EV chargers in the U.S. by 2030. And this Nevi funding going to states was supposed to help with that.
Right. And that effort was getting off the ground, maybe a little bit slower than some of us expected, but it was happening. And then the Trump administration came in and effectively froze any new funding from that program. So this was in February. There were a few $1 billion that couldn't be touched. States couldn't access it and try to award that, award contracts out to new projects. And the DOT, the Department of Transportation, said it was reviewing the program's guidelines to make sure they aligned with the new administration's priorities. And we know that those priorities are not exactly all about supporting EVs or clean technology. It's more about supporting oil and gas and drill, baby, drill.
Drill, baby, drill. It's worth noting very quickly how this program worked, which was that the federal government doled the money out to the states doled it out to people who applied for those grants. So it was like a multi-stage process, and it was a hell of a lot slower than expected because of that. Money flowing from the feds to the state, and then it was also the grant applicants had to deal with permitting challenges at all kinds of local levels, because it's very different to install an EV charger in one part of town than is another part of town. That varies from state to state and region to region. We've had people on this podcast talk about what a pain that process is. It's not turnkey, so it kind of dragged a little bit. But when the faucet got shut off, a bunch of states sued the Trump administration to unblock the funding, since it was approved by Congress in one of the budget sessions and could not just be halted for any old reason. And that brings us to now, right?
Right. So that lawsuit is not officially settled yet, but a federal judge ordered a bunch of that funding to be unfrozen while that goes through the courts. And she also said that the states were likely to win that lawsuit. And then this week, DOT issued new, slightly revised guidance. So before it pulled this guidance, which basically made the funding, it meant that states couldn't get this funding. Now they have brought back the guidance, changed it a little bit. So now states can reapply in the next 30 days. And you could tell from what came out of the DOT that they were not very happy about this. They basically realized they just couldn't hold this up anymore, no matter how much this new administration maybe doesn't love EVs. So Transportation Secretary Sean Duffy said, "While I don't agree with subsidizing green energy, we will respect Congress's will and make sure this program uses federal resources efficiently." So here you go, but I'm not happy about it.
It's actually, coming from these people, that's actually kind of a fairly reasonable response. I feel like Duffy seems like one of the less insane cabinet members of the Trump administration. I mean, I'm not throwing praise to the guy, but this is a very pragmatic answer. And it's okay, well, perhaps he can't admit it publicly, but he sees the value in improving transportation infrastructure. And I do agree with him that this there is value in making this program run efficiently and not wasting money and not being a punching bag on Fox News again. So I hope they're able to make it work somehow. But I don't know, it's not the worst response I've heard from those folks.
But also the idea that it was so inefficient and it was wasting all this money. And you hear Trump saying things like they only built 8 chargers and they spent $7 billion. That's something that's become pretty pervasive in the media, and especially in the right-wing media. And that's just not that true. I think everybody sees that. Everybody wished it went faster, but it wasn't it was completely stalled out and impossible for anybody to build anything.
Yeah. And that process is getting better too. It's worth noting. We've talked to people in the charging industry who are we're learning from our mistakes. We're getting through those permitting issues we talked about. More and more people, municipalities, companies, gas stations, rest stops, they know how to build these things now. I do think this process accelerates over time. So besides that stuff, do you know of any changes that are happening in the Trump era of Nevi?
Yeah, so the important thing is that when they, brought back this new guidance, it wasn't like they pulled some tricks to basically kill this program. The idea was they were, quote unquote, slashing red tape, trying to make this, these charging stations and these application processes move faster. I don't know that they did a ton here, but they did change the guidelines to eliminate any language around environmental reviews, around equity, things that states would have to say they were doing when they're thinking about where these charging stations should go. That's all kind of, I think, expected in this era, right? Removing anything that's related to, DEI or climate, stuff like that.
Let me guess. Someone went through like the plans and hit Control F and looked for like diversity, equity, and
Something
just
like that.
and just delete it all. And like that's the new plan, right?
And then real stuff, like they changed the requirement that so before Nevi stations had to be no more than 50 miles away from each other along these major highway corridors. And then once a state built out every 50 miles along its major highways, then it could start using that money for other charging stations, for slow chargers in other areas, for fast chargers that weren't on the highway. And they got rid of that 50-mile apart rule. So now they can build them farther apart, and they can declare that their highways are built out and start using that money kind of more flexibly. So that's an actual change.
That's not the worst thing when you think about it. Like modern EV ranges are getting pretty good. You can go a hell of a lot more than 50 miles on one fast charge. And like, frankly, we need more level 2 and slow chargers elsewhere. So like, that's actually not a bad change, I think.
I think one of the criticisms that you could say about that is like, well, the whole point was to make sure that the whole point of federally funding this is to make sure chargers get built in those kind of charging deserts that are far away from things where there isn't charging right now. And so if you're kind of pulling back those restrictions and you're saying kind of build them wherever, that doesn't necessarily accomplish that same goal. But I think in general, EV groups, they were happy that this guidance came back, that it gives a path for this funding to start flowing again. But at the end of the day, it's like the Department of Transportation claimed that they were reviewing this because they wanted it to run faster and more smoothly and more efficiently. And they did that by freezing it for 6 months and getting slapped with lawsuits and throwing everything into chaos. So that doesn't exactly make sense to me. It seems like if you really wanted to review it, you would at least, I don't know, let it keep going, let it go while you review things. So yeah, a weird approach to efficiency, I think.
I'd say experience teaches us that maybe some people shouldn't be expected to be treated as rational actors. Just throwing that out there.
Yeah.
All right, now it's time for Plus Minus, our segment where we talk about who's up and who's down in the EV world. Tim, who you got for me this week?
I have a minus, and it's VinFast. This is the Vietnamese EV startup that's been trying to make it work, trying to make inroads into the U.S. And there's this great Bloomberg story this week about how they're basically pivoting away from the U.S. and Europe. They were trying to sell cars here, and now they're kind of refocusing on emerging EV markets like India and the Middle East, other places in South Asia and Africa. Basically, what they say is that these cars did not get good reviews to start out with. They were not selling like they thought they would. In fact, I noticed recently that the VinFast dealership that used to be near me in Berkeley closed recently. So maybe that's a sign.
R.I.P. man. Yeah. Sad.
Yeah. There was never anybody really in there. I'll say that. I went in one time and the salesman was like so shocked that anybody was coming in. He was like, I think a little flustered that anybody wanted to like learn about the cars.
We should find that guy and interview him. I bet he's got stories, or doesn't.
Probably not a lot of stories. Yeah. He's got the story about the one guy who came in that one time.
He took some great naps on that job. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what this Bloomberg article lays out is that most of these cars are being sold in Vietnam, where the company's based, and where its billionaire founder is from. And there's one interesting data point that I wanted to highlight, which is that this story says that filings show that 92% of VinFast's revenue over the last 4 years came from Vietnam. 1/3 of that came from parties related to VinFast. So they're not having a great time selling these cars to people who aren't like related to the company.
They're selling cars to themselves, but to juice the numbers, basically.
Yeah. So we hope you figured out VinFast.
Do we though? Well, someone hopes they figure it out. Maybe.
Yeah.
My plus this week. I'm going to go with EV charging in America. We keep reporting on good news there almost every week. We had a story this week about J.D. Power had a new report about Reliability is improving dramatically in this space. Nevi funding is back on. Like, in spite of all the headwinds in this industry, like, it's not a bad time to be in the charging space, honestly. It's not a bad time to be an EV driver. I would not sure I would have predicted that last year of the charging industry. Like, I kind of felt like it was headed for, off a cliff this year with everything going on. It seems to be continuing its growth and maturation and like getting better and better. I say heck yeah. So that's good to see,
Yep, agreed.
Cool. All right. Well, thanks for listening to the Plugged In podcast from Inside EVs. We'll be back next Friday. Today's show was produced by Michael Perkins and brought to you by the Motorsport Network.
Make sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts, subscribe to the InsideEVs YouTube channel, and tune in next week for our interview with Rivian CEO RJ Scaringe. See you next time.
See you next time.